Okay, let's try this again. This is the lecture for European history for Wednesday, the 23rd of March, 2021. The two film clips. What? 2022. Fine. I was just thinking of the good old days.
I don't think that's happened since like. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see. What you were really seeing is two different worlds at play. The world of I will call it the world of the combat soldier in the front lines, and that was Kaiser Wilhelm II, who came to personally pin medals, iron crosses on the chests of various soldiers who were up for decoration. And there's a reason why those two film clips are side by side, so that you can see the gulf between the world of those who command in war and those who fight. Yes, your question. Yeah. You weren't here, were you? Oh, well, right over here. If anyone needs a new packet other than Miss Daigle, please come over and get one. Do you need one? Oh, okay. I'll bring him. Let's see. So, the world of the combat infantryman is up close and personal intimacy with death. Anyone else need a notepad? If they weren't here the day I issued them? Okay. Make sure you have your notepad out, please. Him in that shell crater was not mere literary license. That sort of thing happened. Now, it's one thing to kill somebody by dropping a bomb on them through a bomb site. Very impersonal. It's another thing to shoot somebody you see as a shape through your iron rifle sights. They're a shape. You shoot down an aircraft. You don't think of the pilot, unless you happen to see it, in which case you're still shooting down an aircraft. You sink a ship. The ship goes blah, 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 but your target is the ship, not necessarily the men on board. But in the infantry, you're fighting and killing men, and it's not always through your iron sights or because you swept the area in front of your machine gun position clean. It's because you attack, they attack. So you find them in the trenches. You smell them. You see them up close when you're hitting them with your spade. I got a spade, an entrenching tool for the U.S. Army a few years ago at a gun show. Just thought I should have one. What I didn't realize until I took it home was that it had the edge of the digging surface, which is sharp enough anyway to kill, notched, just like those bayonets. So that if you were to hit somebody with them, you would rip into their flesh and pull some out. I don't know why. I don't know who did it. I certainly don't think it was an authentic thing, but it was grisly. Now, I don't know why it matters to people that things like that not be done. But again, I think it's because young men, any person actually, most of us would rather face death quick and clean than be maimed and suffer the rest of our lives without the full use of our bodies. What are some of the things that we've observed? Well, they dug into the earth to avoid getting shot. Earth is a great stopper of bullets. It's something that is wonderful at muffling explosions, so everyone digs down. This leads a troglodyte existence. And some of these trenches are there for 4 years, 4.5 years. As such, these trenches get filled with rainwater and have to be pumped out. They get filled with snow and have to be shoveled out. They get filled with bodies and have to be cleaned out. They collapse and have to be redug. The trench lines are in a series. They're usually in a pattern a bit like battlements. You've got and that's just the front line. The second line does the same thing. Why do you think they have those crenellations? Yeah.
Would it be to stop like line of sight and things like that? And
absolutely.
Like a mortar lands, doesn't it?
Yeah. If you get into an enemy trench and shoot a machine gun sideways, you're not going to kill people way down. It's the same reason that on a ship during battle, or during emergency situations, you close all the bulkhead doors. You close all the bulkhead doors in order to limit the damage. Water floods this compartment, but not that compartment. The ship has a fighting chance to stay afloat. So by segmenting the trenches, you prevent the enemy from easily breaking through and killing people all along. Why have a series of trench lines connected by communication trenches that go roughly forward and roughly back? Well, because what your job is to slow the enemy down. It's all about cutting their momentum, making their attacks break up. What is the ultimate weapon in the trenches? The machine gun. And they do not yet, early and in the mid part of the war, have mobile machine guns. The machine guns are like little artillery. What they do is you place them, you've got a crew of 3 or 4, and you basically hose down an area of the enemy trenches. With a machine gun, you're not shooting necessarily at individual targets. Your job is to cover a section. It's like a zone defense in basketball. The whole point of German infantry tactics is to move the machine gun around the battlefield. Why is the machine gun the queen of battle in the trenches? Because one small crew can dominate a huge area of ground. Because early in mid-war, there are no armored vehicles. Every attack has to be carried forward with foot soldiers. Now, in addition to the machine gun, you've got grenades, which are developed throughout the war, made better and better. Grenades are man-carried bombs. The German grenades tend to look like a potato masher. They're stick grenades. You throw them like you throw a throwing axe. Allied grenades tend to be more circular, more bomb-shaped. And in most cases, what develops is you pull an activator that activates the bomb on a short fuse timer, 5 seconds, say. So you pull the pin, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now sometimes the timer is slower, sometimes it's faster, sometimes it doesn't work. But the goal of a good grenade throw is to have the grenade land among the enemy before the enemy can pick up the grenade and throw it back. That's always a risk. And in the heat of battle, people sometimes pull the pin and throw it right away and the enemy picks it up and throws it back, and then you're killed by your own grenade. Something else that happens in modern war is that a heroic individual, and I can't explain why, and I use the word heroic rarely, they see a grenade and they do an instant calculation. I can't throw it back. There's not enough time. And before they say that, they're on it. They dive on the grenade to absorb the explosion so that they get killed, but their mates aren't. I can't explain why people do what they do, but it's not something that they think about, it's something that they do. There's barbed wire. The successor to barbed wire is razor wire. Barbed wire is not designed to kill exactly, although it certainly can. Barbed wire is not designed to slow down an attack, and maybe even to deny the enemy an attack route. You string enough barbed wire, and it becomes very difficult to get through. Now, if you have time, you can cut your way through barbed wire. But in training, what they'll teach a person to do is to dive down and lay down on the barbed wire, hopefully without perforating themselves too badly. And then everyone else in your unit steps on you to cross. And then you get up and you continue. Think about that. How fun that must be. Then there's a mortar, which is basically a grenade launcher. It's a short-range weapon that infantry controls. But the other thing that is used and is planned for, and this is going to seem strange, is the bayonet. To kill with the bayonet. If you want to understand why trench warfare is the absolute fulcrum of the First World War, which is the absolute fulcrum of the change in the history of Western civilization, from a rising civilization to a civilization that is in crisis, it is because for 100 years the Victorian peace had built civilized habits and mindsets. As far as I'm concerned, the people of the West who started World War I were better than we were in terms of shared morality, because they were a much more Christian society than we are. And that meant that there was a great deal of decency that people behaved towards one another with that isn't there today. These people had spread out and conquered the world and were trying to civilize it, and they were blind to their own hypocrisy and their own weaknesses, but they were trying to carry what Kipling called the white man's burden. And they asserted that they had the white man's burden, the burden of civilization, the burden of noblesse oblige, because they were the only industrial civilization on the planet. And they had emancipated slaves, and they were in the process of slowly emancipating women. And they had modern hospitals, modern for those days. They had learning. And the best thing that the most civilized people on earth could do for 4.5 years is line up their best young men, blow whistles, have them climb out of trenches, and sometimes approach enemy trenches not at a run, like you saw in that movie, but at a walk with fixed bayonets. The British did this at the Battle of the Somme, across dozens of miles of front. Long lines of volunteers. The British Army hadn't adopted the draft yet. In one morning, well over the population of the city of Coeur d'Alene was killed because they were walking with fixed bayonets towards machine guns. And while the tactics refined a bit over the years to scurrying from trench hole to trench hole, in fact, human wave attacks against fixed, fortified positions with mortars, grenades, barbed wire, landmines, and machine guns was employed again and again and again. How could Europe, as a society, look itself in the face ever again and think to itself, we are the gift of God to mankind? We are bringing light to the savages. We are bringing civilization to the barbarians. And we do this over and over again to our best young men. It was the repetition. It's understandable that in the first battles they would still do Napoleonic things. Because after all, they're not going to look at what happened in the American Civil War, even though it clearly indicated that Napoleonic line tactics don't work anymore, not with rapid-firing rifles, Gatling guns, and artillery. But fine. But the fact that 2 years into the war, at the battles of Verdun and the Somme, the British are still using line tactics that Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, would recognize, is an indication that something has gone terribly, terribly wrong with the most civilized nations on earth. There's no excuse. There's no explanation. Just throw people at the problem and gamble that your side has more chests than the enemy has bullets. Landmines. There's a wonderful weapon. It's an area denial weapon. So you plant a bunch of mines. You'd better make darn sure you know where each and every one is. Because if you don't, they're going to be a danger to you as well as to your enemies. And the thing about the Earth, especially when you're dealing with artillery barrages, is it moves. Things shift. And so you end up with minefields planted that no one really understands anymore. Maybe the records are destroyed. Maybe every survivor of the group that planted it is killed as the records are destroyed. Maybe the area gets churned up so much by artillery that it doesn't matter where you planted the mines, because where they are, if they still exist, is a complete crapshoot. It's utterly random. On top of all of this, I said that the machine gun was the dominant weapon on the battlefield. Among infantrymen, it is. But the real power in World War I is with artillery. Artillery develops rapid-fire, breech-loading cannons, or breech-loading guns. They're not called cannons. And the explosives that are shot, and they are explosives, aren't all designed to go off when they hit something. The most effective way to actually use artillery, and this is something we developed in the Civil War in the 1860s, is to have a canister explosive explode above the heads of your enemy. It'll rain hot shrapnel down on all of them. So you don't want to actually redecorate their garden and real estate by blowing up the earth. No, you just set explosive after explosive after explosive up over their heads, and you kill them from above. How does an artillery shell kill? Well, it's got a lot of explosives inside. So the explosive blast can rip somebody apart if they're right close. But it also is a metal case. And when the explosion happens, that metal case ruptures and becomes hundreds of pieces of sharp, burny metal that'll go through a human body like a hot knife through butter. And the thing about artillery is it doesn't care if you're brave. It doesn't care if you're noble. It doesn't care what kind of person you are. All of the things that a soldier needs to do to face their courage and overcome their fear, none of that matters. Their character doesn't matter. Their ego doesn't matter. It's simply, where does the shell land? That is not a question of virtue. It is not a question of morality. It is a question of luck. Now here's something. An artillery shell lands among you, you and your buds, and doesn't explode. It's called a dud. That happened because in the industrial production of artillery shells, like with bullets, every so often you have a dud. You have one that doesn't go off. What is that like? And, oh, yes, all of these bullets and shells go faster than the speed of sound. So you never hear the bullet that's going to kill you. You just hear the shells and bullets that are going around you. The bullet will arrive before the crack of the enemy rifle. But that's not all. Because chemistry has developed to the point where we can mass produce chlorine gas and put it in shells. Now, at first, chlorine gas was used on the Russian front by the Germans. What they would do is get a bunch of tanks and pipes and put them up near the front lines and wait for the wind to go the right way, and then they'd open the spigots and the gas would come and kill a bunch of Russians. Eventually, both sides got good enough to put chlorine gas inside artillery shells. You don't need, you still have to watch the wind. You do not want to deploy an enemy, a bunch of gas onto a target and then have the wind blow all that gas back onto your own guys. That's a bad idea. But still, being able to have the gas come out of explosive shells that you lob onto their positions, that's a much more effective way of using it. Now, at first, there was no defense. The more advanced officers understood that you could wrap yourself up, and the best thing you could do actually is urinate on whatever you're going to put over your nose and mouth, because the chemical reaction was such that it would reduce the effectiveness of the chlorine gas. By breathing through a urine-soaked piece of cloth, you might actually live through a poison gas attack. Chlorine will melt your lungs from the inside out. So when you hear the expression, somebody's coughing up their lungs, this actually happened quite literally, no exaggeration, in the First World War. But that's not enough. Because we developed, we being all sides, gas masks. Oh, I gave you two. We developed gas masks, which cover the eyes as well as the nose and the mouth, because poison gas can blind you. So there's a new kind of gas, mustard gas. Mustard gas isn't really a poison gas in that it's not really designed to kill by having you breathe it in. It's called a blistering agent, but what mustard gas really is airborne acid. If you have mustard gas and your arm is exposed to it, your skin will literally boil and melt off. So when dealing with mustard gas, not only do you have to avoid breathing it in or having it touch your eyes or anything else, but what you really need is a full-body chemical warfare suit, which they didn't really have. But that's not all. Miners and sappers would dig tunnels under enemy trenches, fill those tunnels with explosives, and detonate everything. Messines Ridge in 1917 was blown by the British. It was a major German position. The entire hill disappeared, and windows broke in London across the North Sea because the pressure wave from that explosion was so great. The only explosion that came close to that in the First World War was in Halifax, Nova Scotia, a sleepy Canadian port town on the Atlantic. There was an ammunition ship that exploded. It wiped out 2/3 of the city of Halifax and killed about 1/3 of its people. It was the worst disaster of that kind in the history of Canada and possibly in the history of North America. But that's not all. Because Orville and Wilbur Wright developed the heavier-than-air aircraft. But even if they hadn't, thanks to the Montgolfier brothers around the time of the French Revolution, lighter-than-air balloons were used, but now we can use hydrogen. And in fact, Count von Zeppelin in Germany, near Lake Constance on the Swiss border in the south, developed lighter-than-air dirigibles. A dirigible has balloons of lighter-than-air gas filled with hydrogen on a metal structure, usually made of aluminum. And you can attach engines, and you can have bombs, and you can carry troops. So Zeppelins, early in the war, bombed London quite successfully, and the British aircraft that are sent up can't reach them, because the Zeppelins fly so high that the aircraft can't equal them, can't even get within machine gun range. So the British repeatedly are forced to fly almost straight up, fire their machine guns in hope of hitting something. Now, on the good side, from a British point of view, the fact that the Germans use hydrogen means that they're basically flying in a giant explosive device, because hydrogen combusts explosively. If you can cause a hydrogen, boom, there it goes. But heavier-than-air aircraft get good enough by late war so the Zeppelins are suicidal, and even the Germans don't use them anymore. They use heavy bombers like the Gotha and the Streiken. Air battles are fought over the trench lines between so-called knights of the air, young pilots who go up into the planes without a parachute because they don't have them. And at first they're scouting with binoculars, but then they get angry because some of their friends are killed, so they bring a brick and they wing it at another scout plane. And then they say, why not a grenade? And they wing those at each other. And then they bring pistols up and pachoo, pachoo, pachoo. And then finally, someone decides to build a purpose-built fighter aircraft with a machine gun. And they start shooting at each other. It becomes clear that the best way for a fighter aircraft to be designed is to have a propeller pull the plane through the air and have a couple of forward-firing machine guns, medium machine guns. There's a problem, though. Shooting through your own propeller can kind of damage your own aircraft. So what do? Well, for a while, they actually armored the propeller, so bullets would just spray around, and hopefully it didn't hit the pilot. But eventually, the propeller would get knocked off. A Dutch inventor named Fokker comes up with the solution. An interrupter gear. Even though bullets come out of machine guns faster than the eye and the ear can track, a machine knows. So the bullets fire, patum, 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 then they stop while the propeller goes by, wump, 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 and then patum, 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 until the propeller comes again, wump, 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 wump. And with the Fokker interrupter here, the Germans actually for a while get dominance of the air. Now you hear about airborne aces like Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, and Raoul Lufberry, who came from Wallingford, Connecticut, where I went to high school. Eddie Rickenbacker and others. There was the Escadrille Lafayette, which was an American volunteer group before the U.S. entered the war, fighting for France against the Huns, against the Germans. But amidst all this Knights of the Air stuff, understand, the average life expectancy of a pilot on the Western Front was 2 weeks. That means that half of the pilots who were deployed in aircraft of any kind are dead within the first 2 weeks. Because in the air, it's completely unforgiving. You can't dive into a trench. Well, you can try, but you'll only crash. And that's just land warfare. I will tell you that I have corrected everything that you've turned in unless you turned it into me today. Some of you really ought to look at your grades to see about improving it. And I will try to give you some time. Try to get these things in by Friday. I'll try to give you some class time on Friday to do that. But I would do most of it, or all of it, beforehand so that you can get better grades. I guess that's it. Thank you for your attention. You may talk among yourselves until dismissed.